This is Sarah's O'Reilly Auto Parts story.
Driving cross-country with 2 young children is ambitious, to say the least. Then our check engine light came on. We pulled into O'Reilly Auto Parts and they tested it. Turned out it was a faulty sensor. They referred us to a great mechanic just down the street and we were back on the road in no time.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Hi there, I am Adam Kirbas, and this is the 6th episode of my podcast. In this episode, I thought about it a while, and I thought we have to clear up some very important issue. And this issue meaning that it doesn't matter whether it is my artwork or anyone's artwork, but nevertheless, I am a millennial. And I think it is very important to talk about the social backdrop in our time right now. For example, we are in the pandemic. The pandemic will have a huge impact in the future. It has already a huge impact now. Now this is the social distancing will probably be the future of human interactions, and given that the pandemic, especially in the end of the pandemic, many cities, many countries will be depleted of their financial resources, and of course everyone will try to prevent this from ever happening again. So the pandemic will be for us millennials as well as for other generations a crucial point in the history. And I want to talk about in specifically of the millennial backdrop, the social conditions which led to this development of our current society. But of course there is no real name for this era, for this society. But one thing I want to clear out is that I do not think that one can call this area postmodernism. Postmodernism, according to me, is over or ended. You can say either with the end of the Soviet Union or with the rise of the personal computer, or in later with the internet, how you want to see it. I don't think that this area where we're living is postmodernism anymore, and I will later on talk about it in detail. What I intended to do previously is to go for it right away, to somehow separate the development of millennials, how millennials or the social conditions of millennials, and then wanted to compare to baby boomers, because this is the generation which somehow are our parents and grandparents. However, I then decided that we have to go further back, or at least clear some very important issues, and important issues meaning of social transformations. We have to, before we talk about the backdrop, we have to talk about what is actually a transformation, how far does it go, and so on. And of course, I always, this is a point of view from Europe, especially from Austria, as well as from Germany. Germany and Austria speak German, or the national tongue is German, and I think it is very important, because for example, I only want to name one example, the internet age, and the programming language, for example, is in English, and due to that, there was a language Reformation, somehow a language change in the German language. This is called the Neue Deutsche Rechtschreibung. This is when I went into school. There was a change in the German language. This may sound alien for Americans, but in Europe, especially in German, in French, in Spanish, I don't know, there is always a central authority which somehow defines language parameters, defines what is accurate in a language, vocabularies, defines grammar and so on. And this new change in the German language, this happened in the 90s. This was due to the rise of the computer age, the programmer language and so on. And I think there is a difference between them and between Europe and America. And I want to talk about this as well, the social backdrop of the development, and of course, because I have to be aware of the geographical implications, because despite the fact that the Soviet Union collapsed, Europe always became in a way or another dependent of the Americans and of their influence in the world, and then the rise of China. I think this is very important that we have to talk about it, especially now in the pandemic. We have to talk about great catalysts in the society or in human history. But please note that I am not a historian. I read some history books, and that there are many, probably a lot of catalysts in human history. One thing I want to say up front is, of course, history always implies global history, but nevertheless, I brought up in school in a way with an Eurocentristic view. My history lesson was mainly about the Holy Roman Empire, and then the First and Second World Wars, and that's it. And of course, we did not learn much about China, for example, because China and India, these were these dominating powers. China was up to the eve of the Industrial Revolution, the center. This is something you have to say beyond doubt. China was up to the eve of the Industrial Revolution, and then to the Opium Wars, the center of the world, and then later it lost it, and now it is with questionable means regaining it. However, nevertheless, truth be told, we don't know little about China as well of the Asian country, but of the of global history. But nevertheless, I think that European history, especially from the imperial ages on, had a huge impact on the world, and I will then talk about it as well. One thing I want to start with is, of course, with a definition, because please note that I studied philosophy, so it is not only that I fancy myself with definitions. Not at all. I think definitions, some in a way, make things easier because you bring it off the point, and ideally this is a short, poignant definition, so that you always remember it. This is some sort of your support for your memory. I have to apologize for that. I have not come up with a very short and eloquent definition for until yet. Nevertheless, I have to offer an definition for social transformation as well, and I've prepared one for this episode. And the question is cultural and social transformation in human history and society means that an event, if it is war, famine, technological development, or any other foreseen or unforeseen occurrences, changes the foundation of a society significantly and permeates all aspects of human life in this society, either gradually or abruptly, and enacts chain reactions which go beyond the borders of this society and its people. This is a definition, and of course, this may be seem very concise for some. I know that, or hopefully, that people from other different backgrounds are listening to this podcast or not. We will find out or not. But however, I will break this down. And in order to understand, I mean, again, it maybe not have or wasn't clear why we need this. I mean, why do you have to talk about significant transformations? This is something I will then clear up in the future, because the rise of the internet, the rise of the smartphone, especially the iPhone, when it was introduced, had a huge impact on society. And later on, it will be easier to understand, what was the difference between baby boomers, how did the baby boomers grow up, this was after the two world wars, how did they grow up, and then the conditions about the millennials, and then to understand better in a way the cultural implications and how millennials think in the current state, because millennials now will take over or are starting to take over the baby boomers. They are mostly already going into retirement now. We millennials take over, and it is somehow not bad to understand or think about what are the social, or what were the social conditions which made people think in a way or not. But please note that it is true that for some instances, or for some development in human history, that in a way ideas led to human emancipation. This is partially true. I mean, I would this is somehow some sort of an elitism worldview, that only ideas would have led to change in human history. Well, I rather reject it. And the other thing is, I'm not quite sure how the material conditions alone contributed to human conscious, which is a common belief in the Marxist society, belief group, that the material conditions would determine human conscious. Well, I always some sort of took this with a big grain of salt, because this is it would somehow entirely surrender the human mind to its habitat. This would mean that we humans are not different from animals, from humans, but human history shows actually pretty much clearly that humans always change their habitat, they always change their circumstances, and they always they were. It was, of course, in some instances, in parts of human history where humans were somehow left to the fate of the material embedment and their conditions. But nevertheless, the human mind is very inventive, or came up with very ingenious solutions for scarcities and so on. And this is why I think, especially within the Industrial Revolution, this is something which pretty much is extent that with the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, that technological development, technological inventions are the driving force of human development. This is, of course, the car. For example, let's say the car, which had a huge impact on how on traveling on distance. Before the car, it was the train that brought parts of a country closer together, then aviation, and then of course this is what we will later talk on, is the internet, how the internet really changed a lot of how we talk, for example, what we talk, how we consume news, and so on, as well as other parts of them. But like I said, and in my definition, maybe I will reread it to make it clear. Cultural and social transformation in human history and society means that an event, if it is war, famine, technological development, or any foreseen or unforeseen occurrences, changes the foundation of a society significantly and permeates all aspects of human life in this society, either gradually or abruptly, and enacts chain reactions that go beyond the borders of this society and its people. The last point is very important because change has always go beyond a special confined area, so that it is part of a common knowledge and of historical good. For example, the French Revolution was not only a revolution confined in France and it had a significant impact on the French people. No, the French Revolution went beyond the borders of France and then had a huge influence to all other nations around the world and so on. And this is as well as religions. This is not confined to revolutions. Think about religion, if it is Christianity, which is gradually took over the Roman Empire, or it was faster with Islam in the Middle East. However, one thing I want to clear about is this is the Marxist definition of transformation, or one part of it, and one part of the Marxist transformation means goes back to Hegel. I mean, I don't want to go into detail. For those people who read Marx know this passage, that this means that every transformation has always elements of the previous one in it. I mean, this is of course true, but it is partially true. It is not true in a way. Think about the conquistadores in Latin America. I mean, they pretty much eviscerated the Maya and Inca societies. So they brought down their own culture. They brought their own language and morals and thought system. So they didn't really build on the accomplishments of the Maya and Aztec countries, and to this very day, as well as in North America, the Native American population, they were rather forced in the reservoirs. They were rather excluded from the society, and the settlers brought in their religion, their culture, and today the Native American population mostly live in as social outcasts. However, the same is true for many other cultures in history, which were eviscerated, which we do not have anything even left to work with. So that it's not true, or it is not always true that the new culture would build on the previous one. Only think of Africa. In Africa, colonialism and imperialism pretty much destroyed existing cultural bonds and societies, and so forced upon them European society, so they did not really build on the previous one. I have separated this definition in three key elements, and I want to go them through in detail, which I think is very important. With a lot of examples, we do not have to bother about any concise definition and so on, but it was, like I said, it's in a way easier to remember, and as a philosopher, you somehow get used to it. One key ingredient is, like we said, cultural and social transformation of the social structures of society. Think about the American and the French Revolution, especially the French Revolution, because the French Revolution was still a feudal system. It had as well as the Russian Revolution with the end of the Tsarist regime, and it had as well as a cultural transformation. I think about it in a way. In the Russian Revolution, the Bolsheviki took over, pretty much eradicated everything everything of the previous social structure, as well as the French Revolution. It was an attempt to somehow, when one reads the history of the French Revolution, there was an attempt to break with the previous social structures, but then later on it was somehow always taken back, and it was rather back and forth. And the American Revolution was rather, it was not, and I will talk about this a little bit of later, it was rather an independence from Europe than really a social transformation. It was, excuse me, it was rather more ideological. Nevertheless, the American Revolution had a huge influence on the French Revolution as well. And these are mainly changes which came abruptly. Well, of course, in the American and French Revolution, there were a couple of years beforehand, there was already something brewing. The Russian Revolution rather was a result of the First World War, but we could social and cultural transformation. This is as well as religion. Think of Christianity in the Imperium Romanum, in the Roman Empire. It took centuries to establish the Christian religion as the state religion and it changed, of course, the politics of the Roman Empire. I don't want to go into it to discuss whether it was bad or good, because there are some research. I mean, there is a lot of literature about the Roman Empire, very interesting literature. I mean, the Roman Empire was a big and mighty empire. There are a lot of literature of it, and I can only advise to them. And very interesting literature as well as podcasts. So I have heard a very, very, very interesting podcast about the Roman Empire, and I can only recommend reading of the Roman Empire, as well as listening to audiobooks and podcasts. However, and this would be rather very slow and gradually transformation of social structures, and then of course there could be an abrupt cultural and religious change. This is what you find in Islam, which you found in the Middle East. But of course, now what does change of a foundation of a society mean? How can we think about it? I mean, it means, as well as the use of language, it does not mean that people have started speaking a different language. It was partially the case. I mean, if the, if there are invading forces who took over a country, they like in the in the Americas as well as in Africa or in sub-Saharan Africa, they brought in their languages, so the language changed. But if you only think about the French Revolution, it was not the change of language, rather the change of vocabularies, how people would address each other, especially as citizens, citoyens, and as well as the clothes. The French Revolution had a huge impact on how people wore clothes, which type of clothes. Then, of course, behavior, social behavior. The French Revolution, especially after terror, people would rather be secluded, and some historians think that that one of the reasons of the liberal society that you have to separate your private life from the public life, that this is originated in the French Revolution and its terror. Well, I have not found evidence to that yet, but I wanted to say it here. But as well as the French Revolution, of course, ended the feudal system. This means a change, a fundamental change in the individual freedom of everyone. The peasants in the after the revolution, they owned land, they worked on their land, they had something to do, and of course, so to sum it up, the French Revolution had a huge impact on art, fashion, politics, and freedom. And now one important part, which I said before, was that it has to go beyond the borders of this society where this transformation happens, because there might be any transformation in a secluded area, but like those cultures which were eviscerated either through exogenous effects, or for example, exogenous effects would mean through invasions or through famine, diseases, like it's happened in Central America, where some cities were just abandoned because there was not enough food to nourish the population. But the important thing is that it has to go beyond the borders. And now I want to compare a little bit to the impact of the French Revolution to the American Revolution. I mean, of course, the American will not like this to hear, but to say it openly, the French Revolution was actually more important to the history of in human history than the American Revolution. And this is one simple fact, and this is the geographic location, because America was across the Atlantic. When America became democratic, the European powers did not or were not threatened, because America was far away, and information always was. This is like the post office. You never know whether these informations are true or not, or who sent them, and so on. So, but the French Revolution had a huge impact on the overall human history, because first of all, France was in the center of Europe, and the second thing is that this was already where Europe, the imperial age of Europe, and all those imperial powers, which then later carved out the world among each other, they were all in close vicinity to France. And this is the reason why the French Revolution had a huge impact on the society, not only in France but as well as in Europe, especially with the Napoleonic Wars, where then the ideal of the French Revolution, of course, later on, in a way, tinted some of his extremes, taking back, and somehow it became a bourgeoisie revolution. However, it was then taken beyond our borders of France, and that had a huge impact on then later on not only for the development of Europe, but as well as of the development of the world, since it was then taken in the colonies, in the European colonies, and ideals of the French Revolution were then taken over. And then, of course, then later on, it was the Industrial Revolution, the steam engine, what was the driving force which you can produce manufacturing goods in an astonishing way, and can amass wealth and material goods. However, like I said, I wish I would have talked about other parts of the world as well, but due to a lack of knowledge, and later on I will have to focus on Europe as well, because history, no matter what it is always a point of view, and this is only a small rafa for us, or a small viewpoint, or a small part for us, for us to understand current developments. And lastly, I want to talk about some examples which I think somehow shows these developments, these significant transformations. I mean, some of them may not be 100% accurate. Like I said, it has to be all foundations of the society. Please note, this is not always possible. You cannot. There are always enclaves within a society. Only think about the Amish in the US. They live without electricity, despite the fact that we had already an industrial revolution. Despite all around them, everyone has electricity. I mean, of course, there are people who willingly resist development, as well as people who unwillingly resist. I mean, if you live somewhere in an area where you do not have access or much access to information, of course, you may know one thing or another, of course, and that's why it is not always the case. And second of all is, of course, transformations, even though it is war, even though it is famine. I mean, this always takes time. Only in the age of the internet, transformations happens very fast. Or right now with the pandemic. I mean, this is happened really fast and at once, and famine, of course, this is something I will talk about shortly, is of as well as diseases. Famine is as well has a huge impact of social development. One example, and again, I mean, there are of course a lot of examples, and I didn't want it to go too far back. I mean, of course, a huge change happened when humans stopped being hunters and gatherers and settled down and started making agriculture. Of course, but it has to taken into consideration. But for us, interesting is always as well as politics, empires, and this is the reason, at least for me, this is the reason why I started in the antiquity, in the Greek antiquity, because we have, because of the simple reason there are just enough documents, and you only have to sit in a library, read, or you can listen to audio books and podcasts. They are very interesting stuff, and you can learn a lot from the Greek and antiquity. However, one great transformation I saw that was the fall of the Persian Empire by the hands of the Macedonians, by Alexander the Great. This was not only a conquest of a very hostile state, but this was rather, as well as it initiated the end of the city-states in Greek, as well as it had the effect that Hellenism was spread through the Middle East. So Hellenism, as well as the Greek culture, were incorporated in the Middle East as well as in Central Asia. This is what people always forget, that Hellenism reached Central Asia, and that even in Central Asia there were not only Greek settlements, but as well as many Greek cities and towns were founded in Central Asia. So Hellenism had a huge impact on the Orient. It went beyond the borders. It went, the Greeks, even after Alexander's death and the crumble of his empire, or the fast dissolvement of his empire, still the Greeks were dominating in these areas. Think of Egypt. The Greeks are pretty much were the elite. For example, Cleopatra was actually a Greek. So Hellenism had a huge impact to the world, and this was back then the known world. The second thing I chose is the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. There is, of course, a lot of literature about the Roman Empire, and I don't want to go too much in detail, but most important is the culture of the Romans. This was Latinization. The Latin was spoken next to Greek. The Greek culture had as well as a huge impact on the Roman culture. The Greek philosophy to this very day is still present, and it is, like I said, it had as well as influence to the Middle East. So the Greek culture cannot be said of has had only an effect to the Western world. It had as well as has an effect to the Middle East, and as well as had to the Roman Empire. And then of course the Roman architecture had a huge influence. The Roman streets, I mean, everyone knows about it. And of course the most important thing, the Roman economic. I mean, the Roman Empire was wealthier, was better equipped, structured, and it encompassed the whole Mediterranean. And later on, when the empire collapsed, this was actually then another huge change, because then this pretty much dissolved the economies. This pretty much changed the entire culture significantly, so that people then went, so that the urbanization, the Romans, they drove forward of the urbanization. There was already, Rome had back then already about 1 million inhabitants, but then when the empire crumbled, people went back to living in provinces. The economy was not as advanced as before, and it would take another more, and it would take to the founding of the European Union, when Europe would come together again. and I talked about diseases and plagues. One important plague was in Europe, the, the, the plague in the Middle Ages. You could maybe one doesn't see the immediate effect of the plague, but plague or before the plague in the Middle Ages, plague had a huge impact of the in the Roman Empire as well as in the Middle Ages, and the plague indirectly, one could argue, had indirectly an effect to the creation of the Magna Carta because of the high death tolls. Peasants of the British Islands were rare, so that they had a stronger position in their negotiation and so on. So it is indirect that how plague had an effect too. I mean, of course, one of the most significant changes in human history was, of course, the Industrial Revolution. And I don't want to talk too much of the Industrial Revolution because, in a way or another, people have heard about it. Especially Marxist literature is somehow obsessed with Industrial Revolution, and this was one of the reasons why I didn't start with the Industrial Revolution, because I think change was before or happened before the Industrial Revolution as well. But in the Marxist literature, you somehow have this feeling that they start counting with the Industrial Revolution. No, this is not the case. Change happened before the Industrial Revolution, and I think this is what I will talk the next time. That the Industrial Revolution or the fundamental change of the Industrial Revolution is only matched by the fundamental change of the personal computer and the rise of the internet, and then later on the smartphone, especially the iPhone, the huge impact because the internet changed the way how we consume news, how we consume data, as well as the language. It changed a little bit of language. Think about this SMS language like LOL and so on. It had a huge impact. It had a huge impact of social boundaries as well as of hierarchies. And I think that after the Industrial Revolution, the driving force of human development is actually then indeed the technological innovation. I mean, of course, there were technological innovations before the Industrial Revolution, but with the Industrial Revolution, then technological inventions do not happen by chance anymore. It is rather predictable that there is always new invention. There's always something new, and this is then the continuous driving force of human history and human development. And like I said, this is not the postmodern age anymore. We do not have a name for this age we are living in, because this is not what people used to do. This is rather names which are given later on. This is names for special ages are being given to later on. However, this was it. I mean, this was a very short cut. I think it was important for me to continue, especially the next time when I talk about, in a very short way, the difference between millennials and baby boomers and the impact, the cultural impact of for millennials, what happened. I mean, after the fall of the Soviet Union, the rise of the internet, the rise of Facebook, social media, and so on. So thank you for listening to me. Thank you from Turkey. I'm in Turkey, Ordu. I hope you are all doing fine. I hope that you come, that we will get through the pandemic, and I wish you health and all the best. Bye.
It's finally time to start firing up the grill. From city to shore, Acme is everything you need to prep for this summer season. Download the Acme app to shop for this season's essentials any way you want. Open the Acme app, clip your deals, then order your items online. An experienced Acme associate will carefully select your groceries, bag your order, and bring it right to your car or deliver right to your door. Download the app or visit acmemarkets.com for program details.